Hello, everybody. On behalf of International IDEA and Inter Pares, I may welcome you to the closing session of the International Democracy Week 2020, organized together with the European Endowment for Democracy, European Partnership for Democracy, the European Network of Political Foundations, and Carnegie Europe, and supported by the European Parliament. I wish a warm welcome to the distinguished speakers, colleagues and all the participants who join us online via the European Parliament live stream website or the YouTube channel. We are very much delighted to have you all here with us. My name is Marilyn Neven. I'm Program Manager at International IDEA's Europe program in Brussels, and I will be moderating this session for you today. Well, as I said, we are honored to welcome to this session the Speaker of the People's Majlis, Mr. Mohamed Nasheed, Member of the European Parliament, Mr. Thomas Tobe, the Director for People and Peace at the European Commission, Ms. Henriette Geiger, who will kindly stand in for European Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen today, and Secretary General of International IDEA, Kevin Casasamora, who is also former Vice President of Costa Rica. The Vice President of the European Parliament, Mr. Fabio Castaldo, will also join us very soon. This session is organized by International IDEA's Inter Pares program, which is the EU's flagship global program to strengthen the capacity of parliaments and implemented by International IDEA. And International IDEA does that in partnership with the European Parliament and the 27 European Union member states parliaments. Participants who are familiar with the Inter Pares team know the tremendous drive they have to implement this project for DG DEFCO, focusing on international peer-to-peer assistance, knowledge development, and the organization of conferences and workshops on topics of high relevance to parliaments and their functioning. As you may know, this year's online edition of the International Day of Democracy conference has become a Democracy Week, and it concentrated on the impact of COVID-19 on democracy. This particular session, the closing session, will zoom in on how parliaments needed to adapt during the crisis and how sustainable those changes are. We have the honor to present two session parts today. This one is the first one is a high-level part, and there is one practitioner's part. Participants will be able to ask questions to the practitioners who will join us later. I also cordially invite you to join this conversation actively during that second part of the session, and you can send in your questions via the chat on the YouTube channel or Twitter, but then please use the hashtag Democracy Week 2020. My colleagues will help to collect them and so that they can be answered by the speakers. We have 1 hour 45 minutes for this entire event, so I think it is high time that I pass on the floor to our eminent speakers. I ask the speakers in the meantime to mute your microphones when you are not speaking to ensure the audio quality. To ensure that quality, I do my part, and therefore I have the headset on today. May I now invite Secretary General Kevin Casasamora to start the session with a welcome address on behalf of International IDEA as the host of this session. The Secretary General recently spearheaded a call to defend democracy in times of COVID-19, which is supported by almost 100 organizations and nearly 500 prominent individuals across the globe. We look forward to hearing about why well-functioning parliaments remain essential for democratic development and how assistance providers as International IDEA can strengthen them. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary General, also because you have participated in previous sessions during this Democracy Week. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, for the very kind introduction, and thank you also to the team of International IDEA in Brussels and the co-organizers for putting together a truly fantastic program over the past few days. I would also like to welcome some of the very prominent speakers of today's session, Fabio Castaldo, Mohamed Nasheed, Thomas Tobé, Henriette Geiger. Thank you so much for being part of this discussion, and we are honored to have you. Before I give the floor to our eminent guests, I would like to recapitulate some of the incredibly interesting, topical, and truly crucial issues that have been raised in the course of this year's Democracy Week. These topics truly speak to the many relevant and to some extent greatly unexplored angles in which COVID-19, the current COVID-19 pandemic has and will continue to affect democracy and human rights. For those of you who weren't there, I can only say that we've had fantastic discussions on the state of global democracy, European foreign policy, and democracy support amidst the pandemic. But also, we've had forward-looking sessions on the future of democracy after the pandemic, on how digital technologies are changing the political landscape, on the impact of COVID-19 on the media and the rise of disinformation, on how political parties are operating in the pandemic, and even, last but not least, about the demonstrations and the protest movement in Belarus. The red thread through the whole week has been that we cannot take our democracies for granted, and that we need to defend democracy because it is the only system that can respond to the unprecedented challenges humanity faces today. Not only that, to the extent that it is the only system that respects our inherent dignity as human beings, it is the only political arrangement that allows us to envision a better future for generations to come. We are at a critical juncture when it comes to our democratic institutions. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought not only health and economic challenges. In fact, it is testing our governance structures and democratic processes in very acute ways. Already now, we can see this clearly by analyzing the data in our global monitor developed with the support of the European Commission, which tracks the impact of COVID-19 measures on democracy and human rights in 162 countries, or the PARES Parliamentary Data Tracker, which maps how parliaments have responded to the pandemic. And it is also a very valuable tool in this regard. From our analysis, we have seen how unforgiving this crisis has been in exposing pre-existing ills in democracies all over the world. Leadership deficits, polarization, weak governance structure, underinvestment in public goods, and a very serious erosion in trust in public institutions. We have seen how authoritarian rulers, under the guise of pandemic-related measures, have tightened their grip on power, silenced critics, and circumvented democratic processes. We have seen how governments have harassed, muzzled, and jailed journalists in an attempt to limit citizens' access to information under the pretext of fighting disinformation. We have seen how emergency powers have been invoked to do things that have nothing to do with the pandemic and everything to do with the intention of shutting down critical voices, limiting civic spaces, and harassing minorities. We have seen examples of emergency powers deployed to curtail the free flow of information and enhance the state surveillance with little regard for privacy. We have seen emergency powers being used to get the military involved in internal affairs in countries that have a disturbing history of coups and military tutelage. What have we learned from all this? Perhaps one of the most important lessons in stemming from all this is that there is nothing inevitable about the advance and sustainability of democracy. Democracy is neither created nor maintained by itself. It is something that requires continuous vigilance, dedication, and support. And I certainly hope that this crisis will prompt donors and assistance providers to enhance dialogue, coordination, and cooperation to support democracy and the rule of law around the world. We are starting to see signs of that. Just yesterday, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, highlighted in her State of the Union speech, and here I quote, "Democracies and a community of law are our founding values, but we need to nurture them, identify challenges, and find solutions," end of quote. Finding solutions and sparks of hope is indeed particularly important, especially at a time when the narrative for democracy is surrounded by an unrelenting tone of doom and gloom. We have to shift the tone. Now is the time to remind ourselves that as with all great challenges also come great opportunities. For democracies to remain relevant and resilient, we need to dare to rethink, renovate, and reinvent them so that they are able to withstand this and future challenges, including intergenerational ones such as climate change. This also means that they need to be prepared, better prepared, for the technological and scientific realities of the 21st century, for the new ways of interacting with citizens and leveraging new forms of political engagement. This urgent need to rethink how our democracies should work offers a huge opportunity. And if this is true for democratic institutions as a whole, it is particularly true about parliaments around the world. Parliaments are the core democratic institutions to represent citizens, to enable the diverse views of citizens to be heard at every stage of the political process, to create the legal covenants that govern society, to ensure that governments implement their agenda effectively and fairly, to oversee that the taxpayers' resources are indeed used to pay for the best possible public goods and services. During a crisis, those roles, duties, and responsibilities must be carried out, but at an extraordinary speed and in unpredictable or even adverse circumstances. How best can parliaments respond to these challenges than by learning from one another, by building each other up through sharing best practices and lessons learned? This is exactly what InterPares, Parliaments in Partnership project, aims to do. InterPares is the EU's flagship global program supporting parliaments worldwide. And it is implemented by International IDEA, and I'm very proud of that. We implemented in partnership with the European Parliament and the 27 European Union member state parliaments. What better way to conclude International Democracy Week than with a conversation about Parliament's responses during the COVID-19 pandemic, and particularly about the implications of virtual parliaments and their role in strengthening democratic governance. I would like to thank the European Commission for an incredibly fruitful cooperation on this initiative and all or other important projects. I would also like to thank the European Parliament for the excellent support in the organization of this Democracy Week 2020. Both the European Commission and the European Parliament have been wonderful in conveying their unwavering support for democracy worldwide. Last but not least, I would like to thank our partner organizations for this week's successful conference: the European Endowment for Democracy, the European Partnership for Democracy, the European Network of Political Foundations, and Carnegie Europe. All wonderful friends and colleagues. There has never been a better time to join forces to build better and more resilient democratic institutions. In fact, at this critical juncture, we need to go beyond simply defending democracy, important though that is. The very magnitude of this crisis is bestowing upon us the unique chance to expand the frontiers of what's possible. We need to seize this enormous opportunity with both hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary General, for the excellent warm-up of the session and also for your inspiring message on defending democracy. I know that you have another speaking engagement at 3 o'clock, so feel free to leave this session whenever you need to, and thank you very much again for taking your time to join us in this very busy Democracy Week. Now, Mrs. Harriet Geiger, Director for People and Peace at the European Commission's Directorate General for Development and Cooperation, will provide remarks on behalf of the European Commission as the funding partner of the Inter-PARES program. Mrs. Geiger, thank you for stepping in for Commissioner Urpilainen, who regrets not being able to join us because of a last-minute conflicting engagement. The European Commission, and DG DEFCO in particular, is a lead actor in promoting human rights and democracy around the world. We are delighted to hear from you about the place of parliamentary strengthening in EU development cooperation and democracy support, also now in times of COVID-19. Mrs. Geiger, thank you, and you have the screen and the floor.
Thank you very much, Marilyn, and thank you, Dr. Casa Samoa, for your passionate statement and for the passion you put into the implementation of this very important project. I fully subscribe to your views. So, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. First of all, let me convey the greetings and the apology of my Commissioner, Jutta Urpilainen, who can't be with us this afternoon, but allow me to make some remarks on her behalf. This week we celebrated the International Democracy Week at an exceptional time. Each and every one of us has settled into the uncomfortable new reality of pandemic life. But one thing we should never settle for is democracy being undermined or attacked. And parliaments are the central institution of any democracy. They are, in fact, the oldest of all democratic institutions. They reflect pluralism and diversity in our societies. They legitimize the rule of law through their legislative function. And they are pivotal in ensuring accountability of the executive to the people. And this last one is really very central in these times of the pandemic. We can come to that later. So my Commissioner Urpilainen has been for many years a member of the national parliament in her home country, Finland. And that's why she feels so strongly and she's so convinced that democracies deliver best where parliaments are strong. At the EU level, citizens are represented directly in the European Parliament. This is why, since taking office as EU Commissioner, Commissioner Urpilainen made engaging with the European Parliament one of her top priorities. And she is fully committed to contribute to further strengthen efforts and initiatives of the EP in favor of democracy. If parliaments are crucial to democracy, so is supporting parliaments around the world as an important part of the EU's external cooperation. And our comprehensive approach towards democracy protection. So in this way, last year we launched at the European Parliament the new project called PARES that Dr. Casa Zamora was already describing. It's our EU flagship project on parliamentary strengthening. It's unique and it's the first of its kind, and it's implemented by International IDEA. PARES is unique for two reasons. To begin with, it's the first ever EU-funded parliamentary support project with a worldwide scope. So it's an experiment in its own kind. Second, it has a very special implementation modality because it is built around peer-to-peer exchanges, hence its name, inter pares, among peers. So our aim is to strengthen parliamentary democracy by promoting and facilitating exchanges between EU member state parliaments and partner parliaments around the world. And whether exchanging on legislative drafting techniques with Bhutan, sharing experiences on Parliament's budgetary role with Malaysia, or engaging on dialogues about parliamentary administration reform with Panama, the active participation of EU member state parliaments has proven invaluable so far. And parliamentarians to parliamentarians speak the same language. They understand each other. Since the COVID-19 outbreak, we have focused a lot on health crisis and the socio-economic crisis mitigation. But there's a third dimension that we have prioritized: the impact of the pandemic on human rights and democracy worldwide. And parliaments play a crucial role in this regard. In times of crisis, parliaments must adapt, and more importantly than ever, continue to exercise their democratic duties. From the moment the COVID outbreak turned into a pandemic, the EU institutions and the member states teamed up, and as a Team Europe, took swift, coordinated action to help our partners. And as part of our overall response to the pandemic, through our partnership with IDEA, we launched back in July the Global Monitor on COVID-19 Impact on Democracy and Human Rights. So Dr. Casa Zamora was already alluding to this. The results are devastating. It shows widespread, disproportionate restrictions on civil liberties, with the imposition of the state of emergency, freedom of expression curtailed widely, media restrictions all over, crackdown on the opposition, suspension of parliaments in 34 countries, limited court activities in 66% of countries. So really, this is a critical situation. And we hope that parliaments around the world will find Democracy Week celebrations. Let me state once more that the European Union will continue to stand unequivocally for democracy, rule of law, and human rights, and will continue to support parliaments around the world in times of crisis and beyond. And Dr. Casa Zamora already said, the State of the Union speech of Commission President von der Leyen yesterday in Parliament makes it very clear that the EU will not waver on its strong adherence to the fundamental values, both within the EU and in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Geiger, for highlighting the importance of the initiatives of the EU related to COVID-19 and parliamentary support. And I very much welcome the personal commitment of the Commissioner also on democracy and the essential role of parliaments in strong democracies. So thank you very much for that. Perhaps may I ask, by way of a follow-up, how you see the EU's interinstitutional cooperation on democracy and parliamentary development?
What we have done in the EU is we have adjusted in record speed all our current programs and projects to ensure that we have maximum impact on the ground despite the difficult circumstances. And we brought, through front-loading of financial resources, direct support immediately to those most in need. And in our new policies and programs, we're factoring the pandemic fully into our approach, not only in health, but across the board. This will obviously influence the programming of our future cooperation. And the big changes here is that we work, as I said, in a Team Europe approach with our member states together for maximum impact. And we use digitalization as principal tool wherever possible, especially to extend basic services like health and education to remote population. But regarding the policy and programming on human rights and democracy, in the development of the recent EU Action Plan on Human Rights and Democracy for External Action, the negative impact of the pandemic on human rights and democracy has already been factored in, and we are redoubling our efforts to counteract the shrinking space for fundamental freedoms and the curtailing of basic rights. But while it is key that we provide concrete support to our partners on the ground and to our global human rights and democracy advocates through the EIDHR budget line, it is key that we speak with one voice in the EU, strongly and firmly, to uphold democracy and human rights. And there you have seen that there's a groundbreaking proposal in the State of the Union speech of Ursula von der Leyen yesterday, where she proposed that we should introduce qualified majority voting in the Council on human rights and sanctions. This will be a huge step towards a stronger voice of the EU as a lighthouse for fundamental democratic values. But we will need all institutions to be united on this. And the EP support and its outreach to support parliaments in partner countries is much needed. We need that sort of watchdog function more than ever. And this ties in with the political dialogue. So programs on one side can only do that much, but we need a political dialogue with different sectors of the society. There is also key that we engage with civil society, not only in our partner countries, but also at the global level for global advocacy. I can only say that the Commission will use all its toolbox, all its instruments to counteract the devastating impact the pandemic had on democracy and fundamental freedoms. But we cannot do it alone. In order to be able to impact, we need to stand all together, and the Parliament and the Council, our member states, and civil society, each one has a very unique role to play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Geiger. Fantastic. And I would take also the opportunity again to thank and commend DG DEFCO for supporting the PARES program in such an engaged way. Thank you very much. I now have the honor to welcome and introduce the Vice President of the European Parliament, Mr. Fabio Castaldo. Welcome, Mr. Castaldo. Great that you could join us in the meantime. Mr. Castaldo is Vice President, also responsible for democracy, among other policy areas. Fabio Castaldo has been a Vice President since 2017 as the youngest one in history, and he was re-elected in 2019. The European Parliament is an important partner for the Inter-Pares program and part of its steering committee. Experiences from the European Parliament's response to COVID-19 will undoubtedly provide us with a number of best practices that could be useful for other parliaments as well. Thank you, Mr. Castaldo. I give the floor to you.
Thank you very much, dear Marilyn, and thanks and good afternoon to everyone. I would like to say that I'm really delighted to take part to this important debate, and I also would like to thank the organizers of this event, starting from Mr. Casas Zamora, Secretary General of International IDEA. To me, I would like also to thank Mrs. Geiger, the Director for People and Peace, the DEVCO Director of the Commission, for the important commitment she took during her speech, inspiring speech a few minutes ago on behalf of Commissioner Urpilainen, and also all the other speakers that will take the floor after me, who will undoubtedly add the value to this very interesting conversation in a time that, as it has been said previously, is putting democracy facing important crisis and looking for new ways to lead democracy, of course, tackling and facing the important barriers and obstacles we took because of the pandemic. The rapid expansion of COVID-19 has forced some parts of the world, at least initially, to paralysis. At the same time, it forced governments worldwide to make, though, clear-sighted decisions in the briefest possible time. In such an exceptional and serious situation, the concentration of powers in the government was to some extent inevitable, and it was more necessary than ever for Parliament to monitor and direct its work, especially if we take in account the significant limitations to fundamental rights introduced, so as to maintain the balance unchanged among the powers intrinsic to any form of government. In order to comply with the prescription imposed to prevent the spread of the virus, parliaments worldwide were forced to suspend their normal activity, to concentrate almost exclusively on the examination of urgent and unavoidable acts, and on those closely related to the health and economic consequences of the epidemiological emergency we were facing. Furthermore, they had to explore and experiment new methods of scrutiny, debate, and voting. Remote participation proved to be a viable solution to allow Parliament to gradually return to their normal operations in the fullness of their political composition. The European Parliament moved fast to ensure an efficient hybrid parliamentary democracy during the pandemic, shifting all the activities that could be held in online modus to a digital parliament while maintaining a minimal physical parliament for those activities that could not be held digitally. One of the most complicated aspects of the parliamentary activities to be adapted to the circumstances of the social distancing measures was voting. For some national parliaments, remote voting was impossible because the laws didn't allow it, or because for some votes, a physical quorum had to be respected. Already in March, the European Parliament held the voting procedures for the first time in history nearly entirely remotely via an alternative electronic voting system. The participation of members in the voting session, with up to 692 members casting their votes, was comparable to members' participation in voting sessions with members physically present in the chamber. The use of digital tools in our parliament, in our house, and in particular for voting, raises several challenges, like the possibility of fraud, uneven internet bandwidth, technical problems like as bad sound, connection issues, and unequal digital literacy and skills. However, they also brought the major advantages, such as the greater accessibility for physically impeded parliamentarians to perform their duties on a par with their other colleagues, and a higher attendance of parliamentarians during the sessions. Digitalizing parliaments does not undermine their legitimacy. On the contrary, people are quite positive about the digital sessions. Partially transferring the democratic activity online increased transparency as countries were forced to stream live sessions of parliamentary debates. And moreover, the digitalization has narrowed the gap between parliamentarians and citizens. Parliamentarians had to learn new digital skills that enable them to extend the democratic debate to their constituents and to innovate wider democratic engagements. The European Parliament provided members with language and computer courses, and moreover, hybrid devices configured to be integrated in the European Parliament internal network and with high security standards were distributed to all the MPs and staff to allow everyone to work remotely in an efficient and safe way. I am also a member of the Constitutional Affairs Committee, the so-called AFCO committee, and I was directly involved in the attempt to codify the rules for the digital parliament within the AFCO working group on the rules of procedures. The report is now under discussion, and it has the ambitious purpose to create standards and procedures to regulate digital parliament during emergency. I personally propose a procedure that allows the president to declare the transition from ordinary procedures to the use of telematics procedures in case of emergency. In the final text of the working group, moreover, a toolbox of measures available to the president to be activated in case of emergency and with all the counterbalance of the control of the conference of the presidents and as a final instance, of course, to the plenary, and will be introduced with some tools that are proportioned to the entity of the said emergency. Sometimes, dear friends, crisis situations may create a unique window of opportunity that may lead to reforms in policy, institution, as well as in society. The emergency linked to the COVID-19 pandemic has given us no alternative but to digitalize our democracy. Remote participation was mainly treated as an emergency solution that allowed parliaments to resume their work and to return to most of its normal operations. However, given the many advantages that properly thought and regulated the digital parliaments could bring to democracy, the gradual or partial digitalization of the decision-making process may also be considered, in my opinion, as a viable alternative that may produce cost-saving effects without affecting the efficiency of the functioning of the parliament, but rather in enriching it from a certain point of view. Parliament learned a lot about how to combine technology and democracy together and should not easily dismiss the potential of this new relationship. We need to consider the digitalization as a positive consequence of the pandemic crisis, and so policymakers should take the advantage of this momentum and use technology to extend the reach of dialogue and to diversify ideas in the policymaking process. This can be the first step towards exploring the new forms of participation in the democratic life of a country, such as participative and deliberative democracy. I have always advocated for the use of new technologies to bring citizens closer to the institution and to explore new forms of participation in democratic activities. A digitalized democracy can provide an accessible and responsible method of control over legislation in a way that differs from the relatively untransparent parliamentary process that are, or for the most part, understood only by those who work in it and on it. Digitalization will also make it easier to involve experts in decision-making process. However, this digital process and developments can only take place if governments invest in digital democracy and they create the capacity to allow this digital democratic forum to take place, of course, always in the full respect of our constitutional law and founding and fundamental principles. Parliamentarians should use what they have learned and the expertise of the democratic technology to build the greater trust in public institutions and to open up traditional processes to wider deliberation, bringing people closer to the source of democratic power. Governments should take advantage of this momentum in both public attitudes and technological capabilities to transform decision-making for the better. And I can assure our colleagues and friends from the national parliament that the European Parliament will continue to be open, accessible, and totally committed to the idea to have a strong cooperation among each other, to exchange good practices, and to build up together the new forms and new ways of interaction with the citizens that will allow to democracy to do not also be locked in lockdown, and on the other hand also to explore all the possible interaction to make the citizens feeling involved, not once every 5 years, but every day, part of our democratic life and part of our democratic and European way of understanding and developing democracy. So please just be aware that the European Parliament is here to build up this process together with you. And thank you so much once more for the occasion to take the floor in such a very important and rich debate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for these very nice words. And you gave an interesting testimony on how the European Parliament and other parliaments continue to function throughout the crisis, embracing these digital processes. We will go deeper into some elements that you mentioned during the expert session following this one. Thank you again for tuning in with us, and I am now delighted to welcome the Honourable Speaker of the Majlis of the Republic of the Maldives, Mr. Mohammed Nasheed. He was the Maldives' first democratically elected president and often called the Mandela of the Maldives. Wonderful that you could make it to be here today. The People's Majlis was a very early innovator, becoming one of the first parliaments to operate virtually. President Nasheed, could you enlighten us on how the virtual parliament became operational and what are the gains and losses for democratic debate and other parliamentary functions? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Kevin Cass and Jonathan Murphy, everyone present here, Vice President Mr. Castaldo. Lovely to see you again. Thank you very much for inviting me and the Maldives Parliament to this most important gathering. Before I go back to your direction of the question, if I may, just try to outline how very important it is for the Maldives, this Democracy Week, that the International IDEA Foundation and the European Parliament together are marking. We had autocratic rule for 30 years until 2008. Our people, we were able to galvanize our people to political activism. We formed a political party first in exile. And while in exile, we were able to speak to the people again very much through digitally. We were able to galvanize our people, and we were able to impress upon the rulers then the need to amend the constitution and to have free and fair elections. We went back to the Maldives, we continued with our fight, and finally we were able to amend the constitution, and we had our first multi-party elections in 2008, which I was fortunate enough to have won. But democracy doesn't stay, as very well pointed out here. It is not sustainable by itself. People have to sustain it. We were very unfortunate in 2012. We again had a coup and we lost our government, and then we were in the wilderness down and under for the last 7 years. The people of the Maldives never gave up. They continued with their activism, and then finally again in 2008 we were able to have another election, and we are back in government again. On how relevant and important getting the Majlis, getting the Parliament to keep on functioning, whatever sun or shine, rain or hay, all the time. It is the cornerstone, it is the center of all political activity, the Parliament is. And we must be able to continue that debate going. I am very happy to say that the Maldives Parliament, the People's Majlis, was actually the first parliament to start our sittings virtually. We were able to amend our house rules. We had an emergency session to do that, and we took that risk of infection, but we still amended our house rules, and we allowed the House to vote and to debate virtually. We are very pleased that we were able to do that. We were able to not only give money, extra money to the government when it needed, increase money supply for them, but we were also able to scrutinize the spending of that money. We were able to bring in the Auditor General and to scrutinize COVID spending, which is very important for good governance. Money is people's money, it's taxpayers' money, and we cannot do whatever we like with it. So we were able to do that and then continue the Parliament, but again, 1.5 months into the lockdown, the people of the Maldives, and we felt that we had to sit. We had to go in there and we had to have our debates in person. There is nothing like an in-person debate. The main function of a parliament is a debate, and by definition, a debate involves throwing hands, shouting at each other, and the occasional shoe flying to the speaker. Now, if you are not able to have that, that takes away the attention, that takes away the interest for the people from the parliament. We have to get the people watching it. We have to get the people observing it all the time. And to do that, you have to provide them what they want. You have to provide them a lively debate. Yes, during times of pandemic and during difficult times, it's very, very important, as Vice President pointed out, that digital democracy continues. That's very, very important. But we must realize, we must understand that it's far easier in developed democracies. But in emerging democracies, where there is always forces trying to suppress democracy, it's very volatile to only rely upon virtual means. You can control debate, you can control speech, you can control everything if you attempt to do it only through virtually. So yes, but the pandemic has given us an insight, an idea on how we may be able to proceed with governance while there are difficulties. But at the same time, we've also understood, look, man, this is how you do it. You have to sit around and you have to shout at each other. I can't think of our parliament not being able to sit physically and actually gets its job done. We have very lively members from forming different ideas, different colors, and they bring a whole set of views to the parliament, a whole rainbow of views to the parliament, that it has to continue sitting. Again, thank you very much. The parliament, and we thank you for inviting us to do this, to be able to speak to you, and we thank the European Union for your close observation, your assistance and your programs on developing political parties and giving capacity to parliaments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for sharing that great experience you have and also your vision on how parliaments can function and continue to build on improvements in a post-pandemic period. I will, for time reasons, we will turn to a member of the European Parliament, Mr. Thomas Tobé, who is the chair of the European Parliament Development Committee and in this capacity also co-chairs the Democracy and Election Coordination Group of the European Parliament, DEG, which oversees the Parliament's election observation missions. I also would like to note that Mr. Tobé is from Sweden, where International IDEA holds its headquarters. So Mr. Tobé, very welcome, and please, you can take the floor.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, just let me welcome that I have this opportunity to listen to the distinguished speakers today, and hopefully also I can contribute with some reflection that might be of interest to you. I mean, let me say that as a chair of the Development Committee, and I would also actually say as a Swede, of course, I mean, questions of democracy, human rights, rule of law, it's in the center of my heart. So I really think that this is important and we need to discuss this even more. I think it's quite clear that we can, of course, see that now we can see an uprising in Belarus that hopefully will lead to democratic reforms in the end. But to be honest, I'm more worried than I am hopeful at the moment, because it's quite clear that this pandemic, of course, is something that we need to work with globally to defeat, but it's also very clear that this creates a big opportunities for some authoritarian political leaders to use this, and this is actually what we're seeing examples of. And I think Director Geiger is really to the point, mentioning that the European Parliament now really has to be a watchdog now when it comes to the scrutiny and what's going on. And I would also say that Europe now, we need to make sure that we are leaders now when it comes to these questions. So to be honest, amongst friends here, I mean, we do see from Russia becoming more aggressive. We can see that China is basically pushing to make sure that they increase their power, and it is not the same as increasing rule of law and democracy around the world. And we can see that the American administration is more focused on America first. I mean, where I think President von der Leyen was really to the point saying there is no Europe first, that we are committed now to make sure that we are an advocate for multilateralism, democracy, and human rights. When it comes to the work in the European Parliament and in the Development Committee, I would like just to make three reflections. Firstly, my conclusion is that Parliament is working. I mean, the Development Committee is working. At the beginning, everybody raised question, and is this even going to work? But I mean, we have been able to make sure that, of course, we have had to adopt our work in the Parliament. But I would like to highlight that I have seen as chairman that the political groups in the European Parliament all have tried to contribute to make sure that we can be pragmatic in this very different time and make sure that we have had a functional work in the committee. I mean, we have done our work with scrutiny, of course. We have had a lot of exchanges with, of course, Commissioner Urpilainen and Lenarčič. We have had a lot of important discussion where we are also now, for example, taking decision to have a new report on how COVID-19 now will affect humanitarian aid and development. Because, of course, we have a big risk now that we will see a setback when it comes to achieving our SDGs and Agenda 2030. So I would say the first reflection is that the Parliament is working. Yes, we have to adopt, but it is working, and I think this is important. I can also tell you as a personal reflection that I myself have been in quarantine for 2 weeks because I got affected from COVID. And this way way of working actually made sure that I could actually still lead the work from quarantine and make sure that it was working. Secondly, I would say that, of course, there are some downsides that we need also to reflect on. Of course, we don't have enough committee time to work with all the important issues. That is a fact. And then we need to make sure to enhance that and try to make sure that parliamentary work is not only focused on COVID-19 and the most important files. We need to step up our game. That what we've done has been okay, but it's not enough, I would say, due to the challenges that we see in the world. I would also like to mention actually that this, I would say, increased opportunity for political leaders to make the decision. Of course, you can also see that in the European Parliament. Of course, more of the political work is now powered even more from the leadership of the political groups, chairmen in the committee, and I would say that we are decreasing the role for the individual member in the European Parliament because there's not enough space basically to make sure that we can make sure that all MEPs can be involved in the political work, and that is something that I think it is important for us to also reflect on. I would also like to say that not only in the world have we seen worrying steps taken by government, but also within Europe, I would say that we have seen some political decision that is worrying. And I think it's important that if we are going to be a strong voice in the world, we need to do our work at home in Europe as well, and not be ashamed to actually talk about this. Thirdly, I would like to mention, and this might sound a bit, how should I put it, ridiculous, but I don't think it is. What we're losing now, yes, we have this digital opportunity to talk to each other. It's easy for me now to interrogate with civil society, to have meetings. You don't have to travel to New York to have a meeting with an organization. Now it's quite clear that we just meet in this way. But I would say that policy making is, of course, well prepared in the institution. But many of the policy making is actually done in the meeting, the physical meetings between politicians, the informal interaction, the opportunity to look at each other, try to understand the body language, try to shake hands and make a political agreement. That is harder now. And I think that is something that I really do miss. And we need to find a way to get back to that more, because otherwise I think that policy work will suffer. And we need to make sure that this works, because this is not something that is going away. In the Development Committee, in the European Parliament, we are at least making sure that this will be our reality when it comes to our work for at least 1 more year. This is not going away in 2 or 3 months. This is, in a way, the new normal. Of course, it's not going to be the new normal forever, but this is how we have to adapt. But I think we all now have a big responsibility now to push for democracy and human rights, and I will make sure that the Development Committee and the European Parliament will stand firm on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tove. Through your important work at the European Parliament committees, you do not only contribute to the European Parliament's role on democracy, but of the whole EU, and we see you as a valuable ally in our work. Thank you very much for sharing your experiences during the crisis, but also to provide your vision on which challenges still need to be addressed for a good continuation of parliamentary functioning. Thank you very much. With this, I would like to close the high-level part of this event, and I would like to thank again Mr. Kevin Casa-Samora, Director Henriette Geiger, Vice President Fabio Castaldo, President Mohamed Nasheed, and you, Mr. Tobe, for your brilliant contributions. I believe that it was very, very interesting and a very good introduction also to the next part of the sessions. As key representatives of your institutions, you made us confident that democracy will be well taken care of during the next part of the legislature, and that democracy will also thrive again to the benefit of societies and citizens. Let's immediately continue with the practitioner session. I therefore ask the participants online to stay tuned, and I will then take leave of the high-level speakers, although all of you are very welcome to stay with us also for the next part. Thank you very much again for contributing, and all the best. I hope that in the meantime also all the next speakers have joined the event or are still with us. I believe that that is the fact, so let's start with the second part. Also a warm welcome. The discussants of this part of the event are Dr. Piedad García Escudero,